Many believe that speaking in tongues is for private prayer. However, there is not one verse that supports the private use of tongues. All mentions of tongues are in public settings. Other people were always present. 1 Corinthians 14:27 and 28 say that interpretation was necessary, meaning others were present. 1 Corinthians 14:21 to 22 tell us that tongues were assigned to the Jews, meaning Jews were present. 1 Corinthians 12:7 and 1 Peter 4:10 say that all gifts are for serving others, for the common good. There is no suggestion that tongues or any other gift was for private use. 1 Corinthians 14 verse 4 says that tongues would edify the individual, and that is quite understandable. It would probably be even more edifying to heal someone. However, personal edification was not the intended purpose of any gift. Tongues with interpretation were given to build up the church, not the individual, as the following show. 1 Corinthians 12 verse 7. The manifestation of the Spirit is given for the common good. 1 Peter 4:10. Each one should use whatever gift he has received to serve others. 1 Corinthians 14 verse 5. So that the church may be edified. Verse 6. Without interpretation, what good will I be to you? Verse 7. Without interpretation, how will anyone know? Verse 8. Without interpretation, who will get ready? Verse 9. Without interpretation, how will anyone know? Verse 11. If I do not grasp the meaning of what someone is saying. Verse 12. Try to excel in gifts that build up the church. Verse 16. How can anyone who does not understand say Amen? Verse 16 again. He does not know what you are saying. Verse 17. The other man is not edified. Verse 19. To instruct others. Verse 26. All things must be done for the strengthening of the church. Verse 27. If anyone speaks in a tongue, someone must interpret. These verses all point to the public use of tongues with interpretation for building up the church. There is not a single verse that supports the use of tongues for private prayer. This list is taken from All About Speaking in Tongues by Fernand Legrand. A passage said to support tongues as a private prayer language is 1 Corinthians 14:13 to 17. These verses talk about praying in tongues, but interpretation is called for so that others can say Amen. So clearly this passage describes a public prayer setting and has nothing at all to do with private prayer. 1 Corinthians 14 verse 2 is also used in the attempt to prove that tongues is a private prayer language. It says, For anyone who speaks in a tongue does not speak to men but to God. Indeed, no one understands him. He utters mysteries with his spirit. Obviously, this verse cannot support private prayer either, as it says, no one understands him, telling us that it's a public setting. 3 other points about this verse are: 1. Many believe that the mysteries of 1 Corinthians 14 verse 2 are angelic languages, but this comes from a misinterpretation of 1 Corinthians 13 1-3, in which Paul uses exaggerated speech to show that love is greater than all. He is not saying that he could do the impossible and fathom all mysteries or have all knowledge, but even if he could, yet didn't have love, then he had nothing. Likewise, he is not saying that anyone can speak in the tongues of angels. That too is exaggerated language. Secondly, by itself, 1 Corinthians 14 verse 2 makes absolutely no sense, as it says that no one except God ever understood anyone who spoke in tongues. Obviously, this is wrong because tongues were understood. See Acts 2 verse 8. To make sense of this verse, we need to look at verse 28, which is also talking about speaking to God. It says, if there is no interpreter, the speaker should keep quiet in the church and speak to himself and God. So if we consider verse 2 in the light of verse 28, we see that it is saying that, without an interpreter, the speaker should keep quiet and talk to God, as no one understands him. Again, this is a public setting, and without interpretation, the speaker would have been uttering mysteries in the same way that any foreign language is a mystery to us, unless interpreted. Thirdly, the King James has helped to confuse this issue by adding unknown to the text, implying that some tongues were unknown languages. However, all tongues from God were known human languages, just as 1 Corinthians 14 verse 10 tells us. There are doubtless many different languages in the world, and none is without meaning. Finally, a careful study shows that every verse on tongues, whether about prayer or otherwise, is in the context of a public setting, with interpretation called for every time. Not a single verse speaks of the private use of tongues. This is because tongues was a sign of judgment to unbelieving Jews, and once that purpose had been served, speaking in tongues ceased. See Speaking in Tongues, a Sign, at the following link. Amen.